Good evening, all, and thank you for joining us this evening for our Money Matters presentation, a part of the Friars Ties series. My name is Patrick Burke, the Director of Major Gifts, a new member of the advancement team here at PC, and it's my pleasure to be joining you this evening and welcoming you from my office on the 4th floor of Harkins. On behalf of my colleague, Andrea Krupp, the Director of Planned and Estate Giving, it's our pleasure to welcome you tonight. Please note that this session will be recorded and will be available on the Friars Ties website. Please type any questions as we move along through the program at any time using the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. We'll answer those questions at the end of our session following presentations. Tonight's program, entitled The Family and Career Building Stage, Protecting Family and Growing Assets, is the third presentation in this 4-part Money Matters series. So at this time, let's go ahead and dive in. We're very pleased to have two wonderful PC professionals with us tonight to share their experience. The full bios of our presenters are available on the Friars Ties website, but I'm pleased to offer a brief introduction. Kevin Entwistle, a 2015 graduate, is a private wealth advisor and certified financial planner at Morgan Stanley. Kevin has worked in asset management, private banking, and private wealth management. He is part of a family practice with his mother, who is also a PC alum. Kevin particularly enjoys applying a fresh perspective to multi-generational wealth planning, as well as working with entrepreneurs and young adults to plan for the future and the stewardship of their assets. Elizabeth Manchester, class of 2002, is an attorney at Partridge, Snow and Hahn in Providence. Liz advises nonprofits and tax-exempt institutions in areas such as compliance, formation, charitable gift planning, and best practices. She helped create the Planned Giving program here at Providence College when she served as the Director of Planned Giving a few years ago. She also works with individuals on all matters of estate planning and administration. We're so grateful that Kevin and Liz are able to be with us this evening to share their knowledge and experience with the Fryer family. Kevin, please take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you so much for having Liz and I on. Obviously, we're excited. I'm wearing the black and white tonight. I'm a little pumped up to be on with fellow Friars. So I appreciate everyone's time and joining us too. And kind of before we jump into it, just to take a step back and level set, I think like there's two real clear messages that we want to get across tonight. And one is kind of like your team, who's on your bench, and letting you know that you really have a lifeline and we're all here to get better together. And so that kind of follows into the second point that I want to make like abundantly clear is keep it simple. We're going to throw some tips and ideas by you that you can think about and consider, but ultimately we find the best winning formulas are usually simple, boiled down concepts that you just consistently kind of grind away at. So those are my first two thoughts. And Patrick, just for an agenda to keep me honest here, I'll take a few minutes to talk about planning, savings, and budgeting. And then I'll transition a little bit into investing too. I know we've had some questions there. And of course, Liz is a rock star too. So please join in when you have any concepts you want to throw our way.
Nice.
So in terms of planning, the first question I'd almost pose to everybody on the phone or in the Zoom is just, it really at this point in your life, it's not so much about should I have a plan, it's really more about how often are you reviewing the plan. And if we start from square one, we want to know why we need a plan. And so whether you're single or you're married, you're going to have goals in life. And some of those goals might be like saving for your children's education, or they might be a vacation home when you turn 30, 40, or 50, right? We all have different goals, but the point is how are we making sure that we're on track to arrive at those goals? And a lot of people misinterpret what a financial plan is. And what it really is it communicates your path to success, to accomplishing your goals. The hard part is boiling that down to today, because all of these goals have different horizons in our future. And we want to figure out what that dollar amount is and almost work backwards. So an example would be, I've had multiple students actually come up to me that very nicely are, met at Providence, things like that, are getting engaged. And they're talking about, okay, now we're starting to join accounts. We have different investment strategies, different risk tolerances. What do we do? And we come up with a discovery meeting first. So we start to get to know everything, that's important to you that you're trying to achieve. And then we figure out how much can you put away every year. But one of the assumptions people don't realize is that you're on a career trajectory. So we talk about two things in planning. There's human capital, which starts off very high when you're new in your career, and that starts to go down over time. But then you have financial capital, and that starts off usually pretty low for people and increases over time. And so we want to kind of help before those two meet, when you can start making good decisions now. And so your savings plan isn't going to be so linear. You might come into a bonus, you might have a much larger salary increase. And so figuring out what your plan is to put that together is going to be really important. And even like sometimes I'll mention another story, like my wife and I all the time do what we call money dates. And we'll pour a glass of wine, we'll sit at the table, and we'll kind of go through like what we say is our numbers. And similar to at a doctor's office, right? You should know your blood pressure. You start to get older, you should know all these different things about yourself. You should also know your wellness, your financial wellness numbers. And so even the question I ask people in that discovery stage of planning is, do you know how much you spend every year or even every month? And it's a simple question, but a lot of people, and it's to no fault of their own, they haven't really thought about it, don't know that number. So, another number would be, what are you putting away into your 401k every year? Are you maxing out your IRA contribution? Do you know who your beneficiaries are on your IRAs? Things like that. So it's important to like make it fun and make it more of a process, because ultimately, when you do a financial plan, you have this 100-page document, and that's great, but it's a living and breathing document. So it's more valuable, the conversation around it, and how are you staying on track. So that's kind of the financial planning piece. And in terms of investing, I'll kind of pivot here just for a second. Another nice way to think about investing, because we can go off on lots of tangents, but as it relates to savings and budgeting, we talk about 3 L's, and it's your liquidity, it's your longevity, and it's your legacy. And they all kind of interplay together. So a lot of people will come to me and say, okay, I have all this money now that I came into, how much should I invest? Or when should I start? Or kind of these fun questions because it's exciting. But at the same time, you want to think about, do you have enough in each bucket? So you can't start to think about your longevity bucket, which is your retirement, your long-term investing, until you have satisfied your liquidity bucket. That's like your today money. So we talk a lot about having 3 or 6 months of an emergency fund. So people get excited about social media buzz and investing in stocks, and that's important. We'll get there in a second. But I then ask them, well, what's your cash management plan? Do you want to afford a down payment on a home? Well, we can't just throw everything into the market. We need to be a little bit more thoughtful about that. So one more actual tactical, real tip I can give you is, a lot of times we'll have our clients open up a line of credit. And what that does is you can pledge your investments, your cash, right, your securities, and you can receive at a very short, small interest rate, liquidity when you most need it. So it accomplishes a lot of things, a line of credit. It doesn't allow you to sell your investments, especially at bad times. And it allows your investment strategy to keep running, right? So that's that interplay between the two buckets. But again, like having enough cash on hand is always a question people, should consider too. So then if we move into the longevity bucket, I think an interesting area to talk about is like trends right now. People want to know, should I be changing my asset allocation? What should I be invested in? And my answer would probably be, I'm not so much concerned about what the trend is, although it's nice to know and follow. I would be more concerned about the question would be, how are you building a portfolio that's diversified and durable so that in all kinds of market cycles, right, it goes up and down and up and down, are you protected? So you almost want to build a portfolio of investments with a core thesis. So owning certain areas of the market, and then you can start to get a little more tactical and say, okay, I have some extra cash, I've built my core portfolio, and now I want to start thinking about alternatives or non-traditional investments, private equity, things like that. And that's what we call satellite. So again, it's this interplay of your portfolio. And a good line would be, Bill Belichick, if anybody here is a Patriots fan, is that know your role. Everybody do your job. So there are specific roles in your portfolio that investments play, and they're not all going to go up. And some actually are going to be risky, and some are going to be very safe. And if you put the safe with some of the risky, that can be diversified, and you might take a really risky position and put it in that portfolio, and actually brings the risk down because of correlations with each other. So the point being, and I'll kind of pause here, Patrick, is when you're thinking about your investment plan, make sure you're considering your three buckets. We'll probably go into legacy later in the call, and that's philanthropy. But make sure that you're funding each one appropriately, and make sure that you have a plan to follow with that too.
Thanks, Kevin. Before we swing over to Liz, I just have to ask you one question. You talk about durability in your portfolio planning, legacy, trends today. I'm just curious, any comment about, given the trends and the headlines of the moment around all the perhaps speculative trading in the market that is drawing in arguably a new generation, any comments about words of caution there to offer people?
Is that for me or Liz?
Yeah, for you, Kevin.
For you, speculative.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, there's so much to unpack there, but I think it's an important question to pose because on one hand, we all want more access to the financial markets. So I think it's a great platform for people to grow their money and their wealth. There's caution because there's a lot going on in the background behind the curtain that people might not see. And the issue that we have right now is nobody likes to be told that you don't understand what's going on. So for the what we're calling the retail investor, it can seem unsophisticated, like they don't deserve to be investing with the institution. But to your point, and I would agree, is that there's a lot of danger in that. And there's a lot of danger in anything that's concentrated. So if somebody told me we have a young client that invests with us, and he said, I really want to get in on the GameStop phenomenon. And we spoke, we referred to his plan. He talked to his girlfriend about it and things like that. They talked it out. And ultimately, they came up with the decision that even though they have a long-term plan in place and they're following their 3 Ls, they still wanted to participate in it. And so we came up, our team, with the conclusion that if you want to take a small amount, 2 or 5% of your portfolio, and try this out, that's okay. And you just have to know there's a lot of emotion and things like that. So yeah, it can be challenging. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure we could talk more on that.
Mm-hmm.
Liz, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I'd love to. I think I want to start with, I liked Kevin's analogy with human capital and financial capital. So I think when people start embarking on the journey of estate planning, it can seem very overwhelming. People might get bogged down in sort of the technical details of estate planning, but I just want to present the concepts for you in a more general manner. human capital with your estate planning, you're trying to certainly protect yourself. You want to think about protecting your loved ones, whether that be people you want to benefit through your estate plan or charitable beneficiaries, right? Loved ones in the sense of the charities you love. And financial capital, with all the good planning, the financial planning that you would go to Kevin for, you want to protect your financial capital, possibly while you're alive with certain types of special estate planning instruments, which I won't really talk a lot about today, but certainly to preserve wealth for your loved ones or for charitable beneficiaries. So those are sort of the big picture framework you should think of when thinking about estate planning. And estate planning, I'm going to go over sort of a simplistic estate plan and documents I think everyone should consider having in place when thinking about your first estate plan. And there's buckets these documents fall into: estate planning documents that are only effective when you're alive and really will help with decisions that will impact you while you're alive, whether that be for your health care or for your finances, and documents that will take effect after you've passed. So a lot of people don't think about that. Estate planning documents, people think upon my death, but really you should also be thinking of documents in place to help make your life easier and to protect yourself while you're alive. So the first document I'm going to talk about is healthcare related. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with healthcare proxies or healthcare powers of attorney. And those are documents fairly simplistic and straightforward. They differ typically from state to state. There are laws that impact how these documents are framed from state to state. So depending on where you're a resident, or for example, if you have a home in Florida and in Massachusetts, for example, you should actually have two healthcare proxies that might be effective in both states. And hospitals there and healthcare institutions are most familiar with those documents. But really, those documents are to assist your loved ones with a couple of things: indicating what your end of life wishes may be, or just for critical care. So you think of a living will component, how long you might want to be kept alive by artificial means. And granted, that is not a fun thing to think about, right? And people really struggle with that. But there's a component to that, whether that be a separate, what we call living will document, which a lot of people confuse with testamentary wills, which will indicate your end of life preferences, which I say put everything in there. If you want people to massage your feet while you're in the hospital, indicate that in your healthcare documents, right? You want to make sure you're getting your best healthcare. And also people you designate in that document to help make healthcare related decisions on your behalf if there were an emergency, if you were incapacitated. So those are very important documents, and I suggest everyone have a healthcare power or a healthcare proxy, depending what state you live in, that may or may not have a living will component within that document, or the living will may actually be a separate document depending where you live. So that's your healthcare related document. Then while you're alive, you should also have what's called a durable or financial power of attorney. And a lot of people think about this in the instance where, you might have someone that might need help paying their bills, going to the bank, handling financial affairs on their behalf. But really, it's not just in the instance where you're incapacitated, right? Hopefully, when this horrible pandemic is over, we'll all be traveling again, going on European vacations, cruises, whatever the case may be, right? That's a nice thought. And if you just have an emergency at home, you need someone to handle some type of closing for you, for example, related to real estate, or you just need someone to go to your bank and handle some kind of transaction on your behalf and you're out of the country. These types of documents would designate someone to handle that on your behalf. And they're very expansive, and it would cease to be effective upon your passing. So this falls into the bucket of documents that are effective while you're alive. And for both of these documents, clearly I've mentioned persons you have to designate in those documents to make some very important decisions. And Kevin mentioned your team, your sort of financial team, but really a big part of estate planning is certainly your professional advisory team and your overall financial planning. But what most people really struggle with, I think, and have to make hard decisions about is naming and thinking about those persons to designate in these documents, right? And you shouldn't just name one. with appropriate planning, you should definitely have at least one successor. You have to think through a couple of people to name for these roles. And what might drive those decisions, certainly you're going to convey your wishes and talk to all of these people before you name them in the document. I certainly do have clients, although I don't recommend it, that just insert someone for a role in a document and haven't had that conversation in terms of whether someone feels comfortable taking on that role, really going through what that role involves. So I think a big piece in sort of the trusted team that you're going to establish is thinking about who you feel comfortable taking on various roles. And that might be someone who has some financial aptitude to take on a various role, or just someone you have innate trust for. And I have seen people designate persons for a certain role. You can even have co's, or for example, two people serving together. If you think one person might have a certain set of strengths and another person might encompass a different set of strengths, they can work together to achieve your role. So that's just something you should be thinking about through all of these documents. Now, do you have a
Liz, can I just jump in and ask a question that we've got that has just come in that's just right on this topic before we move off, and that is, who do I have to give my estate planning documents to? If I give them to a person I choose as my power of attorney, can I still change my mind and pick someone else?
Yes, so I that's a great question. And frankly, you don't have to give your documents to anyone, but it would really cease to be effective if you don't talk to someone ahead of time, give someone a copy of the document and say, I have designated you for my attorney in fact under my durable power of attorney. Give them an original of that document, because I find more and more often institutions require originals, not photocopies, even though we're in this age of, you think, so computer functioning, but banks want originals. They should have that in hand and understand, as I said, what the role is. Can you revoke that at any time or change your mind? Yes, so long as you have the capacity to do so. Okay, so if you did not have capacity to willingly amend your documents, clearly then you aren't able to do so. If you felt if someone else became aware that someone was abusing their authority designated to them under a document, they certainly could bring an action on your behalf to a court or something like that. But just what this person is probably thinking of, can I change my mind? Can I draft a new financial power of attorney? Absolutely. And people do that all the time. And in this context of ongoing review of one's plan and understanding who they've designated, Kevin mentioned having dates around this, and I don't think I suggest having estate planning dates, but that, I think it's a great idea. But I encounter clients who haven't looked at their documents in say 10 years, and they can't even honestly remember who they've designated, where they are. So it's a great recommended process. Every 3 years at least is what I recommend, to go through and see who they've named. And you might change, right? Things change. If you do have children, as they get older, you might gain trust in them and designate them under a document, or you may have lost someone who you've designated. So absolutely are amended and should be amended as your priorities in life change. Great question. Now on to the documents that I referenced are more effective upon one's death. And I think we all know what a will is, and those are certainly important documents, and everyone should have one, certainly. Even if you're just starting out, as Kevin said, with your savings, with your financial accounts, you're working, certainly as you might have a piece of real estate or think about buying a house, you need to have a document that will designate a few things. Who is going to handle the administration of your estate upon your passing? So who's going to make decisions related to even investments of assets if they need to be invested for a short time, handling any tax obligations related to your estate, being the official person who might have to present the will to what's called a probate court, should you need to undergo a legal process to have the will reviewed by a court and your estate distributed under whatever law you live in, whatever state you live in. And the requirements for a will are different from state to state in terms of what's legally required to make a will effective. So certainly you want to be aware of that. And if want people change domiciles, they should look at that. A really important provision under a will as people start having families or may have children is the Guardianship Clause, which is the clause in the will which would indicate who you would want to care for your children should you pass away or become incapacitated and no longer be able to care for them. That is obviously a very important decision, and again, should name at least one successor, so not just one person, a successor to that person. So you have to have these conversations and go through some really careful thinking in terms of who you want to be the persons that care for your children in the event you are unable to do so. And with the caveat that you don't have to have that same person make financial decisions on their behalf. You can establish a trust in your will. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the idea of a trust, but it's basically a legal structure which can exist in a separate document or under one's will to manage assets in a certain way with the assistance of a trustee. And so you may have someone else who might have, as I mentioned, financial aptitude, who you feel more comfortable managing your children's assets, but you also might have someone who is the person that you feel comfortable making life-related decisions for them. Let's just call it that. So guardianship clauses in wills, very important. What I do want to recommend, and what I recommend for honestly almost all my clients who have assets in their own name, so single persons, married persons, is to think about the concept of having a separate trust. And I don't want to overwhelm you all with technical concepts here tonight, but what trusts afford you, and I'm talking about what's called revocable trusts. There's many different specialized types of trusts in the exciting world of estate planning. But what trusts afford you when you set up your estate plan is a few different things. Savings of expense upon your death, because if you properly structure your assets, you avoid what in most states, some states, the probate process, which is that legal process to distribute assets, can be very expensive. It's a very public proceeding. For example, if you have a privately held business, you have to get a valuation of that business upon your death if you just had a will and it would be made public. So just having a will is not what I recommend as ideal estate planning. Having a revocable trust in place allows for more effective administration of your estate, more flexibility in your estate planning, more privacy and less expense. And for some people, and what I try to tell them, whatever the cost may be of setting up a trust when you initially do your estate planning will be far less than the administrative expense on the back end for your family and loved ones or charities that you want to benefit in your will. And you let your advisors handle the technical aspects, and what they'll do is convey your wishes into that document. And for both your will and your trust, in addition to the guardians, you'll have to designate the persons I mentioned, the executor, which is the person charged with administering your will, and or trustees under your trust. And the trustees, if you do have children, for example, might be charged with handling those assets for their benefit, might be charged with distributing monies. For example, if you left a charitable bequest to Providence College to start an endowment fund, making sure those monies get over to your charitable beneficiaries in the correct way. So I really, for really all of my clients, recommend the consideration of a revocable trust where I practice, which is in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, where the probate process is quite cumbersome and expensive. And frankly, there are other states where it's not so cumbersome. For example, I talked to an attorney in Pennsylvania this week who said the probate process is fairly easy and they don't recommend trusts as much. But for where I practice, even for people drafting their first estate plan, I highly recommend the consideration of a trust. Also, when you're looking at the full context of estate planning, you want to look at what Kevin mentioned, your retirement plan designations, all of your beneficiary designations that you've set up, whether it be through retirement plans, through bank accounts. You want to make sure they all flow together. And just a little tip for some of you who are considering charitable beneficiaries, it's always best to include that charitable beneficiary as within the context of your retirement plan rather than in your will or trust for tax purposes, right? The persons who you designate as individuals in the retirement plan would have to eventually start taking withdrawals from the retirement plan and pay income tax, whereas the charity doesn't have to do that. And always better to put the charitable beneficiary in your retirement plan, and something that an estate planner would recommend to you if you were setting up your estate plan in a holistic manner. So in terms of your professional team, it's quite important that you connect all of us, your financial advisor, your estate planner, your accountant, to make sure all cylinders are sort of moving together and we're all aware of your goals. We're making sure things like your retirement plan are flowing together with your estate plan. So it's really quite important. You find your trusted team, and most of these relationships are long-standing, and you're going to, it's a moving, breathing object that you're going to continue to nurture over the years. Your priorities will change. Tax laws, as attorneys, we're obligated to advise you about best ways from a tax perspective or legal perspective to certainly structure your plan, but it's based on your goals at the end of the day. So I think big picture wise, as you're starting your estate plan, again, the human capital, financial capital, how to protect them, how to get your trusted team going, who you're trying to benefit through your estate plan.
Liz, lots of great thoughts, and your comments are prompting some questions from our participants. One just to quickly throw out before we move on to another topic, but someone is wondering, I don't have a wife or kids. Can I do my own will online? Is that a good idea?
So online is such a big, scary word, right? So I definitely don't recommend the process of Googling will and downloading a will and thinking that's going to work for you where you live. Because as I mentioned, there's legal requirements to make a will efficacious in the state you live in. So you want to make sure you're complying with whatever those requirements are, and your will is not denied at the end of the day for not complying with the legal requirements. And I think that's the real danger of Googling will and downloading a will. I think for some people, the legal Zooms and all that, it might be a good fit because they do have actual lawyers on staff that can help. So I don't totally dissuade that notion, so long as you are getting professional advice somewhere along the way. And I know those legal Zooms and other comparable platforms do have that option, and I would strongly recommend it. What I think you're missing, though, if you proceed down that route, is, again, this, first of all, I think a good planner, depending on your unique situation, which will change over the years, there's subtleties to planning, which I don't think those types of downloading or looking online will provide for you. And I think you want to establish this trusted team of advisors that will work with you over time as your goals change. I mean, who are you going to go to if you've worked on a document that you found on the internet? So I think you're somewhat doing yourself a disservice. And I think if you're thinking it's a cost savings measure, there are attorneys at all different rates. You can find one, and I really encourage people to shop it around and talk to who you feel comfortable when you're looking for an estate planning attorney or an advisor or whomever it may be. And I don't think it's great from a cost savings perspective, because I think that's what people think a lot. You can find a fit that's right for you. And I think you're missing the subtleties of good planning if you proceed in that manner.
Thanks, Liz. Good thoughts. Kevin, to swing back to you, could I ask you to say a word about life insurance? Is it needed? Is it considered part of the financial plan?
Yeah, great question. It is absolutely considered part of the plan. it's not necessarily for everyone at the same time. So there's lots of different insurances, but just keeping it to probably what this group would be looking at, you have a few options. And we have to think about, before discussing those options, why you're investing in an insurance plan. Because I have more of a learned lesson story to share. I had a friend who came to me a few years ago and said that he was sold insurance. And he was sold insurance as an investment. But insurance really is protection for your human, we keep talking about human capital. Let's just quickly define it. It's your future earnings because of your career trajectory, discounted back to what it's worth today. That's your human capital. And so it's a replacement of your earnings. If you were to, unfortunately pass away earlier, things like that for your family. So if there are people relying on your career, you have children, you have a husband or a wife or partnership, anything like that, it's something to consider. And you might have the financial assets, though, that you don't need that replacement. So it's contingent on the person requesting it or looking into it. However, the one quick tip I would say is, for myself, term insurance, I think, is more of an approachable insurance. And it's basically you choose a term, it could be 15, 20 years, something like that, and you pay an annual premium, and it's just a death benefit. So there's no investment value to it. There's none of these complexities and riders, they're called. I'll kind of save that jargon for another time. But I think it's something that if you're 25 to 30 to 35, you're building a family, a career, it's something to look into. And the sooner you do it, the lower your premium's going to be and things like that. So it definitely investigate it, and then you can decide if it's something you need right now or maybe down the road.
Great, thank you. Kevin, staying with you, somebody else writes in wondering, my credit isn't great, and I've gotten myself into credit card debt. How can I still fill the 3L buckets, but pay off the debt and help my credit score?
Love this question. There's no right or wrong answer. So let's kind of boil it down again. There are kind of two common ways there's a whole handful, but there's two that we talk a lot about to pay down your debt. It's like the snowball effect. So if you have a few different, maybe it's student loan debts, credit card debts, or you have a few different credit card debts, the snowball effect would be to just pay a little bit off to some to get the momentum going, and it kind of snowballs into you start paying off larger ones after. The other way to approach it is like the avalanche, where you try to take out the highest interest rate debt that you have. So credit cards really you have to be careful. They could be 18, 20% interest rates versus like a student loan might be something like 4. So the avalanche one might be like, let's pay off the highest, let's put all of our resources towards paying off that debt. At the same time, though, a financial advisor is always going to say, you have to be cautious because, yes, it's important to get out of debt, but it's also important to make sure that you're taking care of what we call shortfall risk, and that's your retirement. So if you're not putting away today, even if it's a little bit, even if you decide the right allocation is 75% paid off, 25% invest, we want to see you investing, because the time, we talk about it so much, the time value of money is so much greater now than it's going to be in 5, 10, 15 years. So catch up is a scary game. And if you can come up with a game plan that works for yourself psychologically, you'll have an easier time doing so.
And Kevin, staying on the topic of debt, is debt always a bad thing? Are there positive aspects to it in the financial plan at all?
Yeah, I'll be brief on this just because I sort of spun it in earlier and probably didn't make a good enough point about it, but that was like the line of credit, for example. So I think I hear a lot from people that there's a negative thing about debt, that you shouldn't have debt. Debt can be very, very helpful, especially in an investment strategy. So a lot of people tell me they have so much cash from weddings sitting on hand, they're making a lot at work. Maybe they have all of their investment options that their technology company grants them or something like that, and everything else is saved in cash. And years go by. Liz mentioned this earlier. Like our our career paths change, things happen in life, and so you can forget about that you left things in cash, and you can also lose track of time. So being able to have access to liquidity through a line of credit is good debt. You can pay that off and you can have access to it really quickly while keeping your longevity strategy in play. The worst thing you could probably do is start to tap into that longevity money, long-term investing early. So again, it's that interplay.
Thanks. Sounds good. This is a question maybe that both of you could comment on. One of our viewers writes, I don't have a lot of cash, but I want to start making charitable gifts. Can you give me some ideas of how I can do that? How does this fit into a financial and estate plan?
Yeah, so I think charitable giving, annual giving, I think just to get engaged with an organization and even start making nominal amounts annually, $25 if you can afford it, is going to be a great way to get your foot in the door, to get engaged. If we're talking about PC, what's going on at PC, supporting the annual fund, which is so needed. And I think if you look at the average size of a gift to an annual fund, it is, Patrick can talk about this more than I can, but $25, $50 goes a long way when you're talking about an alumni base of 50,000 people. So I think it's going to get you engaged. And as your financial plan and financial assets grow as you're over the years with good financial planning, you're going to have more to give there. And, you might even start considering gifts like a stock, for example. There's so many ways to make charitable gifts. People really get tied into the idea of cash on hand. And, when you're just starting out, you might not have appreciated stock, for example, to give, but stock is a great asset to use for charitable giving. What I find a lot of people are using as well these days as they're getting engaged with charitable giving is the concept of donor advised funds. And depending on where your financial assets are, I'm sure Morgan Stanley has options, but the concept of a donor advised fund is very flexible. So for those who aren't familiar, you can make gifts to the fund in any given year, get a charitable tax deduction in that year, and not actually distribute the gifts to a charity in that year or even the next year. It gives you flexibility to allocate your funds to a charitable cause you get really excited about. And during that time, the money can be invested and grow tax-free. So it's a great charitable giving vehicle, and more people are using it. And those assets will grow over time. I've seen people have charitable funds that now they're looking to designate as part of their estate planning, because there is a portion of that fund that you have to plan for in terms of your estate planning. What's left at the end of the day? Who's going to get those assets? Are you going to, hopefully leave it to PC? And that's how it might incorporate in your estate planning, or through other types of charitable bequests. Like I mentioned, retirement plan designations. We talked a little bit about life insurance. What I find with people with life insurance, and I'm sure Kevin has experienced this, is they might have, if they have a whole life policy, for example, that they had a real need for at some point in their life. And as their goals evolve and their estate planning evolves, they find they might have a policy that might not be useful to them anymore in terms of their family goals or other individuals they were looking to benefit. And that's a great asset to even consider for charitable giving as well. So the world of charitable giving and estate planning is certainly one of them. There are so many different types of assets you can use. And a financial advisor and estate planner will help you with looking and exploring at all those assets. But I think if you're just thinking about cash giving and ways to get engaged, I think supporting the annual fund and getting started with a $25 gift, a $50 gift is a great way to get excited about charitable giving.
And I love Patrick, real quick, I'm so sorry to jump in, but I love the idea of the donor advised fund, and we see that a lot too. And even just speaking personally from our own family, we sit around at Thanksgiving now and we do like a 10-minute family talk, and it's one of the best moments to actually approach family discussion around money. So whether it's about philanthropy or whether you're having a hard time just initiating that conversation about legacy and your family and where the money's going after, it's a really approachable and relatable way for the family to come together and express their values. So we might say, okay, we have $100 to give to charities this Thanksgiving, and everybody gets $25. And so what I'd like you to do is present the charity or the cause that's important to you and take 2 minutes and go around the table and share that. And that can be done for 7-year-olds, it can be done for 45-year-olds and up, right? So we all can be a part of that, and it's very rewarding, and obviously money is a very emotional topic. So that's an interesting road to explore. I would definitely agree with that.
And I think along those lines, a really interesting idea that I've seen in terms of families looking at their shared goals for planning is to look at a charitable institution and establish some type of fund at the institution in the family's name, whether that be an endowed fund or some type of other fund to support, say, a sport or something else they're really excited about at that institution. And everyone just donate what they can to that fund and have, the Entwistle Fund. And partially funded through outright gifts or through donor advised funds or through estate gifts. It's a great way to, as you said, to bring families together.
And even taking the annual fund, I know there's many ways of Providence. It's not just you can find so many ways. Like we have a big interest in the athletics. There's obviously a lot of buildings being built, things like that. So I'm sure Patrick can speak to that, but you can do it that way too.
And Kevin, as you're perhaps meeting with a client for the first time or building an initial financial plan, is talking about charitable aspiration and charitable intent and maybe building that into, say, a first-time budget for a new client, is that part of the conversation?
It is, right? Like we're trying to solve for where we're going, and there's 3 levers in the plan that we're talking about. There's like either you need to save more from now until your retirement, you need to spend less, so we need to change your goals because you're probably not going to reach them, or you need your portfolio to earn you enough money. So a lot of people, it's a good question because a lot of people sit there and say, well, when I make it big, that's when I'm going to include that in the plan. And the plan is from today until plan termination. So we're always talking about what's down the line, and we're trying to bring those decisions earlier and earlier. Just like estate planning, that you want to do it now and set yourself up with good financial habits. So of course we're putting that, like Liz said, even if it's $25, we're talking about that. We're being intentional.
And certainly between the two of you, you're describing sort of the full continuum of how people give to Providence College. Many folks start off as regular donors year after year to the fund for Providence College at whatever level is comfortable, participating, being part of the effort. And then as circumstances change and ability to give more might change, conversations can evolve into the endowed fund or projects or many of the other transformative things that have happened here at the college and will continue to happen. So you're right. There's a lot of opportunity there.
You can see somebody sell a business, right? And they come into a lot of money and they can set up a charitable remainder trust where, after a few years it's paying out there. There's a lot of benefits to doing that. You're right.
Absolutely. Well, I'm conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes left and we've got a few more questions to try and work through here. One of our viewers is wondering, are there guidelines for how much we should attempt to save in a 529 plan? Any thoughts there? I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, I think that any good financial planner or any planner that works at a reputable firm will have a calculator. There's software that you can input, if your child is 2 years right now or 10 years. So you figure out the time before you start funding it, how much money you have in it right now, and then figure out a return assumption, right? It calculates some of this and might spit out a number that says every year you should be saving $25,000 or something like that. It's unique to each person. So I unfortunately don't really have per se like a hard and fast number, but I would at least try to add some value is
think about everybody that can be a part of that 529. So we can all gift up to $15,000 a year. And I don't want to call it the family bank, but sometimes there are grandparents or interested parties that want to help your child go to college. And so you can also think about ways that it's not just yourself funding it, but to know that other people can also contribute gifts. You can also front load gifts up to 5 years. So there's some interesting strategies there too. But I would say, if anything, the sooner the better. The more you can put in early, the better too. And obviously you have competing interests with your own retirement, your own mortgages, things like that. But a steady, consistent contribution would be important.
Yeah, and just to echo, I mean, I can just speak from personal experience. I have 2 daughters who are 1 and 3. So my husband and I went through that exact analysis that Kevin just mentioned in terms of working with someone to come up with a number based on inflation and how much college might cost when they're 18 or whatever the case may be. And it seems like a long way off, but it is, a good idea to go through the process Kevin mentioned. And in terms of the ability to make gifts, he mentioned the ability for everyone to put $15,000 or to make gifts to individuals in any given year of that amount. But right now, the law actually allows you to give quite a large amount in excess of that too. So if you or a relative or anyone had a compelling reason, whether that be to, a tax reason in any given year, or just really wanted to make a substantial gift to benefit someone because of a birthday, whatever the case may be, the law does allow them to make even substantial gifts to 529s or through any vehicle really in a given year.
Thanks. Good thoughts. I just want to go back to what we talked about earlier, the concept of a team and the array of professionals that might be on the team. And clearly we have a range of participants joining us tonight, and some folks who are earlier in their career stage. And there's a question here about what professionals are most important for me to have on my team at this point in life. Do I need an estate planning lawyer? Do I need an accountant, a CPA? Do I need an insurance agent, a financial advisor? Thoughts about, who might be part of the team? And I take this question to mean more at somebody at an earlier stage.
I mean, personally, I think for someone at an earlier stage of planning, I think really your key person actually is your financial advisor. And not to downplay the role of estate planning attorneys, but I think what I find, I frankly will say, I don't think I've had many clients that have come to me for an estate plan without really some kind of financial advisor in their life. So I think the role of a financial advisor is quite important. And I think as you're starting out and just going through, day to day, thinking about all the things Kevin mentioned, right? The short term, the long term, you have your first job, you have a retirement fund now. How does that fit in comprehensively with your planning? So I would say if you had to pick one, really a financial advisor is so important. And, as you start to amalgamate assets, it is then quite important. And any financial advisor, I think, would tell you to have some kind of estate plan put into place. So then I think it really makes sense to get your estate planner on your team. And, as you're just starting out, I think many people are able to actually manage tax returns and whatnot, perhaps on their own. But I find, depending on if you start your own business, whatever the case may be, as things get more complex, you then need a CPA, and the role of a CPA cannot be understated. I would say CPAs are so important, and they, even with estate planning, I talk to them all the time in my professional world. So I think really the combination of financial advisor, estate planner, CPA, certainly as you get more complex with your asset diversification, will then become more important. But I would say as you're starting out, the financial advisor, I would say, is a must.
And I would just say to quickly add, from an advisor perspective, I would agree those 3 parties are where I would start. I know insurance agents and they're helpful and things like that, but obviously important to start with your core. And I would almost even say kind of to equip you with some questions to ask people, because I think it's important to have a good relationship that, like a stock, you don't want to be trading in and out. You want to develop a relationship now and keep that. That's the winning formula. And you want your team, your estate planning attorney, your advisor, and your CPA potentially to know each other and to know your situation. And that's when it's completely great. But some questions you could ask your financial advisor is, who are some of your clients? What are they like? Is there a lot of turnover? Do your clients come and go pretty quick? What are some of your processes like? How is your team structured? Because it's a commoditized business. There are so many advisors and they're all very different. It's very entrepreneurial. They all come from different backgrounds and trainings and things like that. So I think it's really important to understand how the team and not just the advisor operates, and to know that they help people like you. So those are some questions I would ask.
Well, I think your comments and presentation here tonight are indicating that our folks like you, and they're interested, because our last question here, someone writes in, and the Fryer family is global. Can I hire either one of you if I live in a different state?
So for me, I'm admitted to the bar in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. So that's where I practice, and that's where I primarily have clients. So I would say if you are a resident of New York, for example, then I unfortunately cannot help you. I would suggest that you get a New York licensed attorney, as every state has its subtleties, and that's where you're best served.
And from an advisor perspective, we have clients all over the country and globe as well. So we're always happy to go through discovery and get to know you better.
Well, this has been great, Kevin and Liz. Really want to thank you for your time and your expertise tonight. We've reached the end of our presentation. There's a survey link in the chat. We ask all of you to please take a moment and complete the survey. Your input will help us plan future sessions. You'll also get an email that will provide the link as well if you don't get to it in the chat. We're so grateful to everybody who's joined us tonight. This has been an interesting conversation, and we hope you have found it worthwhile. Liz and Kevin, you're wonderful members of the Fryer family, and we are truly grateful for your time and expertise tonight. We thank everybody for joining us this evening. Best wishes to you and your families, and go Friars. Good night, everybody.